So Damian, lots of theatrics on the budget this week in Washington, lots of motion, no progress, basically.
No progress. And this is like one of those movies where there's a bomb and they're trying to defuse it, and you know there's always the little clock, and the clock always goes down to 1 second, and then they have to cut the red wire, the yellow wire, and that's what's going to happen this time. It's not going to be done until Monday, and at this point we really don't know what's going to happen.
You know, my favorite line of the week was from Tom Cole, who's a congressman from Oklahoma, been around for a while, a Republican, who said, around here, deadlines are alarm clocks. Nobody wakes up until the deadline arrives,
right.
Not beforehand, and here we are. But I think we established that everybody now agrees, Republicans and Democrats, that the Senate at least is not going to defund Obamacare. The odds that the Congress is going to defund Obamacare are extremely small. And so we're on to secondary asks from Republicans to do something else.
That's right, and I think they're still trying to figure out exactly what they're going to do. The big test is going to be once the Senate sends the bill back, sends whatever bill they do back to the House, whether that what kind of stuff the House tries to tack on, and that might be a game time decision. And the Boehner, we know how unpredictable his caucus is.
And what do you think the options are?
They could do something minor to try to change the healthcare law just so they can try to draw some blood on it to maybe bring it back later. Or they could try to do something else symbolic, maybe it's the Keystone thing or something like that. But they're going to want to do something to show that they still control half of Congress and they're not going to get rolled by the Senate.
But don't you think that the sort of the movement now is to find some way to avoid a shutdown? And the question now is how and can we pull it off? There don't seem to, the bulk of the Congress doesn't seem to want to force the shutdown.
That's right. I think, and it's unfortunately it's all for political reasons. I think the Republicans are worried that they're going to lose if they force a shutdown, and it could affect them in 2014. So they're trying to find a face-saving way out of this. But like I said, their caucus is so unpredictable, and Ted Cruz is kind of the general right now that it's unclear.
Well, I'm curious about the Ted Cruz gambit because he spent 21 hours on the Senate floor talking about how much everybody hates Obamacare on his side of the aisle, changed nothing. The voting was going to happen the way it was going to happen no matter what. I don't know whether he did Democrats damage or did him a favor, because I think what he did was he established that everybody in his party has to unite on hating Obamacare, but they kind of were there already anyway. What he also did was show the futility of trying to do something to stop it, and in the long run, by angering Republicans as well as Democrats, maybe he actually weakened the cause.
I think he's probably interested in building a base in the Republican Party, and so his objective was to do that, and he probably did. He replaces Ron Paul as the favorite of that wing of the party. So the Democrats may be enjoying it because it makes the Republicans look unreasonable, but his interests maybe have been more personal.
But the president was oddly an observer of this whole thing. He was more involved than the rest of us.
Right. Right. He was just a spectator in this, and he says he didn't even tune in for Ted Cruz, so he may not have even been a spectator.
And we certainly believe that.
Right.
I mean, there were football games on.
Right. But he's not been involved in this. He's not reached out to leaders on the Hill. He's stayed very firm that he doesn't want to negotiate on the debt ceiling, but he also isn't getting involved in the CR at this point. He's made very clear that he's not going to go for anything that delays or defunds Obamacare. And so at this point, he's saying, this is your job, Congress. You work it out. I'm not going to play this game. So he's just sitting in the White House waiting this out. And
then, David, the odd thing is that, well, it's not odd, it's a little scary, frankly, is that the net result of all this is likely to be that maybe Congress stumbles its way to funding the government for a while, and there's no shutdown.
6 weeks.
Okay, 6 weeks. But even that has the effect of taking all these contentious issues and loading them on the back of a much more dangerous issue, which is whether to raise the debt ceiling or not. And so instead of, as we were talking before, instead of playing with 2 sticks of dynamite, they're going to play with 10 sticks of dynamite in a couple of weeks.
Right. I mean, Judd Gregg, to amplify our metaphors here, Judd Gregg, the former senator from New Hampshire, said the problem with the Republican strategy on the debt ceiling is like playing Russian roulette and putting a bullet in every chamber. So we know that the Treasury is going to run out of cash shortly after the middle of October, right?
Right.
And so they need to have an increase in the debt ceiling so they can keep borrowing, because despite all this talk, we're not doing anything about the deficit. And it's frightening because we don't really know what happens if the government runs out of cash. Do they fail to send money to Social Security recipients? Do they default on the debt in a really explicit way? And since it's always been thought of as unthinkable and unimaginable, they won't actually tell us what they're going to do. And the Republicans seem to be willing to put onto this debt ceiling increase almost everything that they want to do that they know the president won't accept.
Right. Anything you can think of, the Keystone Pipeline, anything to do with Obamacare, anything that will frustrate Obama will be tacked onto this.
Right.
And onto the one and only thing that the president has said all year long he won't negotiate on.
Right.
I mean, we've arrived at the worst,
Right.
potentially the worst possible outcome of
Right.
all this.
From the Republican point of view, they know that if they want to shut the government, the president will let them do it because he thinks they'll get blamed.
Right.
And besides, shutting the
Right.
government sounds horrible, but it's not very disruptive for a few days. I'm sure the Republicans figured that the president cannot stick to this, I won't negotiate. That at 11:59, if the U.S. government is on the verge of default, and they say you have to change the spelling of your name to Odama instead of Obama, he might actually do it.
And part of the problem is Obama played this game with them in 2011. They got big spending cuts, and so why should they believe that he's not going to play the game again?
Well, and the reverse argument is true. The White House says, oh my God, look what we did in 2011. We established a precedent. We now have to stop that precedent in its tracks. And, you know, by the way, there are some Republicans who are going to agree with that too, because, you know, next time there's a Republican president, you know, what are they going to ask? I mean, maybe they'll show up and ask for a repeal of all the Bush tax cuts as the price for raising the debt ceiling 5 years hence. And, you know, I think everybody recognizes that that's not a great position to be in, but they can't resist the temptation.